you've checked that one out. And today we're going to go through and dive in with some very simple cheap materials. Any old paper that you've got, any old pencil, you can use a simple 2B pencil, just make sure it's sharp. I just happen to be using a disposable cheap mechanical pencil because they're just very convenient, that's all. And what we're going to do is cover today the 3 basic shapes that are going to allow you to unlock almost everything in the world of drawing, art and illustration. This is the video which is basically going to be step 1, how to draw right here. So just like when you're doing sports, you need to warm up a bit and get yourself loose and relaxed. Maybe grab yourself a random sheet of paper, scratch out a load of loose lines, just get a feel for the material, the pencil. How does it mark the page if you work really hard with an overhand grip? Can you just have a really loose flow of forms? Can you just dive in and get some tight lines? It's all about just loosening yourself up, stuff like that, although maybe not quite as cringy, and getting yourself into a relaxed mental state that you can actually just start to get some work done. Try to get a feel for the materials you're using, sure, but also equally try to make sure you're somewhere where you're not going to be disturbed, you're going to be free of distractions and interruptions just for the sake of getting some work done. Now what we're going to start off with today is simply drawing a triangle, a circle and a square. You guys might doodle these shapes all of the time and think this is simply too basic, but trust me, we are going to go somewhere with this. So why is it important to have a go with these basic shapes? Now, firstly, doing something like a triangle is going to level up your perception skills basically. It's going to train you to have a go at drawing straight lines, sure, but it's also forcing your eye and your brain to actually preemptively measure out space and try to understand where different lines might actually intersect. Now, you can do this by just using lighter strokes to build up a good line from point A to point B, or just try to go in heavy and early, but I do recommend these lighter strokes mean that you can work up to a solid line without actually overcommitting to any of the mistakes you might make in life, which is something I learned from my dad when he walked out. Now when it comes to squares and rectangles, these are really solid shapes to just make sure you're happy with drawing, because they're going to end up being the backbone of most of the building blocks of architecture, spatial art and standard day-to-day objects all the time. Again, I'm just making sure that I'm stroking in these lines fairly soft. I'm going to move my page around all the time to get a good solid straight line, and you want to just practice working in a straight line, as straight as you can make it, without actually having to commit to a ruler. And that's really going to just help you out in the long term. And basically, the trick to this is slow and steady wins the race. And lastly, the circle. Now, the good thing with circles and ellipses in general is that these will help you to get to grip with curves and flow, which is basically going to fill the gap for anything in life that's not a straight line. There are 2 popular ways people like to make circles that don't involve tracing or cheating. Now, that's either using a series of practice strokes where you kind of move your arm right from the shoulder, you get a load of movement in really loose, and you kind of theoretically think about where your stroke's going to be by hovering over the page, working out a circular shape before you then lower the pencil and start to very lightly mark the page and slowly build up what might be your final circle. Equally, what other people like to do is actually visualize the circle on the paper in front of them and do a number of very small curving strokes to map out the imaginary circle. And basically, if you pretend the circle's already there, you can just imagine that you're tracing it. And by using lots of small curved strokes together, you build up that line, you build up what's going to slowly make up a fairly solid circular form. And then once you've got that down, you can just come back again and just ever so slightly build up that line. And again, don't commit too early, just be happy by letting it slowly grow, and then all of a sudden you've got yourself a fairly good circle out of nowhere. And for those of you that want to know the cheat code for drawing a simple circle, then what you can do is actually grab a piece of paper, get it all twisty, put your hand down on the paper and keep it still, and simply instead turn the page. Basically, you're using your hand like a protractor and you get a fairly quick simple circle straight off of the bat. But that's basically it. When it really comes down to drawing solid shapes, these are the underlying basics behind the art. Getting a feel for where lines might intersect and learning to judge space evenly. Getting a feel for straight lines, and we're going to use this as a building block for forms. And much like in martial arts, any technique really can boil down to being a curve or being a straight line. And if you understand the same thing when it comes to breaking down objects in a world around you, you're going to find you're using a circle or elliptical curve techniques, or you're just joining point A to point B. And so if you keep practicing even the simple stuff like this, you're going to master the world of what we call shapes. Now it might seem obvious that I'm calling these shapes, but in art that very specifically means that these are two-dimensional flat objects. They don't have any depth. So now we're going to use these shapes to make something that's supposed to be 3D, which means we're going to go from shape to making something which is supposed to be a form. And these basic building blocks that we're just about to have a go with can actually be used to describe almost anything. So I'm rotating the page a bit so it's a comfortable angle for my hand, and we're going to take what we learned from the circle and flatten it just a little bit, so that in this instance I'm going to end up with an ellipse. I'm going to just slowly build up the curve this way, like so, and you can imagine that we're viewing the circle as if it's ever so slightly flat on the page. And if I go back this way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to imagine a point straight up from the middle of this, and just like this triangle, I'm going to join the far edges to make quite clearly a cone. Now, a cone or a spike is the 3D version of our triangle. You could do one which has a flat square base, or do one which has a triangular base. For a pyramid, there's loads of geometric variations, but when you really think and boil it down, you're either working with circular curves or you're working with straight lines. So here's our cone here, very simple. And then what we're going to do is take our square and imagine this as a box in 3D. So a nice way to look at this in a 3D perspective is, imagine you've got the line of the corner of a box straight in front of you, and then you've got almost a very flat diamond shape on top. So that's one edge of our box. The other edge needs to be exactly the same but mirrored. And then you need to make a line just like this one, which is perfectly parallel, going off at the exact same angle this way, and then perfectly parallel, kind of going off that way as well. And then we're going to do the same down here, parallel-ish at that angle. And you'll notice I keep moving my page around so that it works naturally and conveniently with the position of my hand. Again, trying to very loosely rough out those straight lines, and then I'm just going to drop a line down here to build up this side, and a line down here to build up that edge as well. So now you can imagine this is a 3D shape. This could be anything. It could be a very square building from a distance. It could be used to describe the initial shape that we'd fit in, like a chair or a car. But these building blocks are going to map out everything. So when it comes to our circle, we can basically map it out into being a sphere by doing pretty much nothing different whatsoever, because circles or spheres, well, they look pretty much the same from any angle, so that's kind of a win-win. I'm just using loads of light strokes, again, imagining I can already see a circle and just trying to map that out. So let's just curve around in a slightly more solid, more confident version now as we come through. And any place where you think your circle's just a little bit flat or bumpy, as you go over, renegotiate that edge until you get something that's working a little bit better for you right as we come round. And again, remember, we're practicing these shapes. None of this has to be perfect. The more you do it, the more used to it you're going to be, and eventually you'll get these basic shapes to be something that's fairly standard as part of your repertoire. Lovely. And then the last very common form that's probably worth talking about, a little bit similar to the cone, is going to be the cylinder. So once again, what we're really doing is we're working with our elliptical circular shapes here. I'm just going to map this one like so, and then what I'm going to do is just follow this edge all the way down here, straight line. Down here we've got another straight line parallel as well. We're basically making a column or a tube or a drinking straw, anything you like, really flat, and then duplicate that circular shape at the bottom end as well. Just get that curve round. Here's our near edge. Here's our near edge here. And voila. We've basically got, I mean, there's all sorts of variations, but basically we've used 3 basic shapes, and we can use these in all sorts of combinations to build up 4 very, very common forms. These forms are really going to help us break down everything. Now, in order to help describe these things as being three-dimensional shapes to you guys, I'm going to put some dotted lines along the halfway points just so that you can understand the shapes of the surface and the form a little bit more clearly. And then what I'm probably going to do is grab out some pens to increase the depth of the line, and also maybe use a little bit of shading on the markers just to give the illusion that these things cast a bit of shadow and are three-dimensional. Now, I don't want you to worry about that part too much, but if you do have some other pens and markers at home, then go ahead and have a little bit of a play with your shapes and see what you can achieve. We have yet to cover about perspective, texture, light and shadow, which is something that we can worry about for another day. But what I want you lovely lot to do is just nail down these basics, because if you look around at loads of stuff, you'll start to see that really they're made up of just a combination of basic shapes, and that will then make complex things actually become much easier to draw. And it's what I do all the time. So I will go into this in greater depth in a future tutorial, so make sure you've hit that subscribe button. But if you look around at anything, you'll start to see that maybe it's just constructed from lots of simple forms. Take this modern computer and boom, it's just a lot of different boxes. This random yellow dog, boom, a series of gentle circles and ellipses. This deep space gas nebula. So thanks a lot for watching, guys and girls. It's because of your suggestions in the comments section below that we're starting the year with a quick handful of super basic beginner tutorials before we dive back in to some more particular stuff. And that way we can just make sure that everybody's got their basics covered. So I really hope you found this to be useful, and my goodness, make sure you've clicked that subscribe button so that we can hang out for more in the future. All of my tutorials are of course free for everyone because I love to draw, and I really hope that you do too. But it's all made possible thanks to the support of some of you lovely lot on Patreon.